Hi, I'm Annie Yatch. I'm a leadership coach and transformation specialist, and I'm actually here today to talk about how do we make sure that 7-year-old doesn't run your business? How do we address the top 3 leadership gaps that you might not see in your business? And how do we make sure that self-sabotage does not limit how you scale and grow your team?
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 490. Success in real estate often requires more than just strategy. It can sometimes require addressing deeper challenges like stress, trauma, and mindset. My guest today, Annie Yatch, is a leadership coach who helps high-performing entrepreneurs unlock their potential by overcoming these barriers. With experience guiding startups to billion-dollar businesses, Annie's unique approach rewires subconscious patterns and boosts performance. Today, she'll share how to find and tackle your blind spots that limit wealth creation in real estate. Annie, welcome to the show.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you on the show because I think that, a lot of entrepreneurs and real estate investors kind of get in their own way. And they have mental blocks that are holding them back. And I see this over and over when I talk to, certain people. And I'm hoping today you will solve all of that. You'll be able to break through.
Amazing. I'll do my best. I don't know how much time we have, but it might take a little more time to solve all the things, but I will do my best, Brian, I promise.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, and the type of entrepreneurs, real estate investors you work with.
A lot of people reference me as Wendy from the TV show Billions because she was this peak performance coach that helped all these private equity guys outperform all the competition. And so people call me all the time like, Wendy, we need our Wendy. But basically, I've been a leadership coach for probably the last 15 years. But where it all started was I actually went to Georgetown for my undergrad and my grad program because I thought I would go into counterterrorism. And when I started getting into that world, I realized that I loved observing people's behavior and I loved changing behavior to help people be more effective and efficient. But that definitely wasn't something that the agency or the Defense Intelligence Agency was asking me to do. So I realized that since I'm not a good liar, I probably shouldn't go down that path. And instead, I really started getting into how do I transform people to take them from a place where they don't have as much confidence, they maybe don't have as much awareness, to a place where they have that mental edge that helps them outpace the competition. So that's where I really got into studying the brain, studying neurochemistry, studying how do we make these changes and make them sustainable so that we can all have access to more success and drive better success in our businesses.
When you work with real estate investors, entrepreneurs, what level are they at? Like, who exactly are you working with? And what do they come to you? I mean, do they come to you and say, Annie, you have to help me with this problem? Or is it maybe they're not really sure? They just want to get a breakthrough to the next level.
I feel like there are 2 different types of people that come to me who are real estate investors. I have either had the real estate investor that's running the company and has probably a team of 10 to 30 people that he or she is working with. And sometimes these real estate investors are coming to me because they're noticing that their team hasn't been able to perform to the standard or the level that they've set for probably the past 2 years. And they're wondering, why is my team not growing when I'm trying to scale and grow actively? Why am I churning and burning through people? And why does it feel like my team is failing me? So that's why they'll come to me and they'll specifically come to work on the leadership training for their team. But what I typically find is that real estate investors will come to me because they'll say, listen, I know I'm holding myself back. I know there are things in my past that are keeping me from making more money and growing and scaling the team in a new direction, but I keep trying and I keep coming up against the same ceiling. So they're recognizing in themselves that they have capped their own progress and they're trying to figure out what can they do to break through that ceiling to get to that next level.
Do you see a lot of commonalities with real estate investors as to what it is that's blocking them, or is it unique in every situation?
I would say that across the real estate industry, what I've found is that many investors They're stuck in a level of scarcity mentally from when they were in their childhood. So a lot of the gentlemen and women that I've worked with, they grew up not necessarily poor, but always worried about money in their family units. And there was a lot of conflict in the family unit. And sometimes they grew up as the son of a single mom. And so there was always this desire and craving for more. And many times these investors would use that craving for more as a means to prove themselves. And so they were going after business and deals to prove that they were validated or worthwhile, or that they had, a gift or a trait that wasn't really recognized when they were young. So I have seen that as a commonality across the real estate spectrum. But I would tell you that some of the things that block a lot of the real estate investors I've worked with is there's a fair amount of self-sabotage that they create internally, that they can't have everything they want. Like, for example, a lot of the real estate guys that are building these big businesses, they might have an unstable home environment where their spouse is a stay-at-home mom and they have young kids, and she doesn't really understand why they're pushing and driving so hard all the time, because they quote unquote make enough money. And so there's this push and pull between, I feel guilty when I'm at home and I can't be as present because I'm so driven by my business. And that lack of stability in the home environment can really cause this business to be stagnant or not grow as quickly. So I've been working with a lot of men to help them reestablish that stability in the home environment and in their business, in their own leadership skills.
It's interesting you say you've been working with a lot of men. Is it women don't have that same issue?
Women do have that. I just have found that men are much more apt to take action when it comes to business leadership training for themselves. Because as weird as this sounds, either men have huge egos and they don't even want to look at themselves, or men are like, this is definitely me. I just need someone to tell me what to do to make it different. And for women, I think many women in the real estate space, they're not as likely to invest in themselves individually, but they will invest in training for their team. So more of the women pull me in to do training for the team, more of the men will pull me in to do like education and transformation and business leadership for themselves.
You brought up two roadblocks, and one is the scarcity mindset. The other is that self-sabotage. And let's dig into each of those a little bit more. So with the scarcity mindset, give us an example of, what you see and how one might get over that scarcity mindset.
Typically, what I see with scarcity, it can either be at the beginning of the process, right? People that are just new getting into real estate and they're worried that, they've never had as much. They don't know if they're going to be able to create as much. They're not even sure if this is something they can step into fully. And that more goes into, what do they believe about money? What were they taught about money? How did their parents talk to them about money? And there can be a lot of scarcity around, well, I can't create this amount of money because I never created it in the past. But for the majority of the real estate gentlemen and women that I work with, the scarcity more comes down to they make a lot of money and then they're so terrified they're going to lose it and that they're going to go back to how it used to be. So they start making a lot of decisions out of fear and out of the scarcity concept that set up that same cycle to drive them back into having less. And so for the work that I do, I'm first identifying, well, number one, why do you think that you're going to lose everything? Because for most of these people, they have not been in that scarcity place for 10, 15 years, but it's still driving their subconscious thought because the subconscious runs at 11 million data points a second. Conscious thought only runs at 40 data points a second. So we're always in, like 97% of the time, we're being driven by the subconscious, by those fears of something that happened 15 years ago. So we're making decisions from a place where our nervous system is amplified and scared and worried. And that usually means we're not going to make the best choice in business.
How do you recognize that and then combat that?
Usually I can hear it in the language of somebody when they speak to me about the revenue their team is creating or the gaps that are happening in their business. When I see that, the first stage of work that we do is we try to calm the nervous system. So when you go through something very intense as a young child, it typically ramps up your nervous system and it makes you feel like you need to be very vigilant and look for problems all the time, which is why as entrepreneurs, we're such good problem solvers, right? And so what I like to do is I like to bring in, there's a company that I found about 7 years ago that calms the nervous system. And so a lot of the women and men that I work with, they get on these sprays that calm their system, and all of a sudden they'll see problems in their business that they don't have to solve, but if they did solve it, they'd save themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's usually the tipping point for me when they start noticing things they've never noticed before and start fixing things that they never even knew were a problem. that they're like, Annie, this is so weird. I'm suddenly calm. I'm suddenly making decisions differently. I'm seeing opportunities differently. There are more opportunities coming for me. And that's because their nervous system is calm enough that they can see the world differently. So that's sort of that first stage of work.
You found a company that helps calm people so that they can see the problems. What does that mean to calm people? Is it yoga, meditation, drugs?
It's not any of those things. It's an organic spray. They basically designed a way to turn on the microbiotic intelligence of the body, which is the bacteria that live and work in our body. Most of us are only working about 10 to 15% of that being turned on. And so they've discovered a way to, through the gut and supporting the gut health, turn back on higher levels of performance of these bacteria. And then what ends up happening is your brain is more clear, your brain produces more serotonin, produces more oxytocin, all these feel-good chemicals that we've been depleted on or we have a deficit around. And once your body is creating more of these, you naturally see more opportunity. I think when I first learned about this company, my ex-husband and I, we were in a really difficult state in our business. And we had spent a lot of money trying to work on figuring this out. You buy systems, you buy programs, you hire new people. Not any of that really shifts the dial. And we went out and we did this program together. And I think we went from making 40 grand in our business monthly to 185,000 within 2 months. So that for me was a pretty dramatic shift. And we were both like, well, having a calm nervous system seems to be a thing. And that's why for me, working with entrepreneurs, if we can tackle that first, you see such huge gains in just even how you make decisions for your business that it really is, I think, the game changer for a lot of entrepreneurs.
I try to calm my nervous system through exercise, going for a walk.
Yoga, meditation, walks.
Maybe some meditation, although my mind doesn't handle that very well.
Still races, right? Most of us, let's be honest, Brian. When we sit down to try to meditate, it is hard to do. I don't like to meditate because I'm like, how am I going to sit for that amount of time? I could never sit still. And then I go and get my nervous system calm. And now all of that is much more sustainable. I can actually do it because my body is naturally inclined to do it. It's very strange, but very cool.
Let's talk about self-sabotage. And you did give some examples, but can you give us some other examples of how real estate entrepreneurs self-sabotage and how you might combat that as well?
So a couple of big ways that real estate entrepreneurs and investors self-sabotage. The first is they constantly jump back in to solve problems for their team, if they have a team. Or they constantly insert themselves back into some aspect of the business that they really shouldn't be working in anymore. And that typically happens because there's a part of them that only gets value and feels valued by jumping in and solving problems. But as you evolve as an entrepreneur, you really have to be evolving out of solving all the problems and being a firefighter every day to being the person that is managing the team. And so that's one level of self-sabotage. The second level of self-sabotage is, as entrepreneurs, especially in real estate, we assume that our common sense is everybody else's common sense. And so we get really frustrated with members of our team when they don't do things the way we ask them to do them. But really what that means is that as the entrepreneur, you're not being clear on your genius zone, which is part of your common sense. And so there's this whole gap around expectations where the entrepreneur will not share their explicit expectations with their team. And then they also won't teach their team how to contingency plan the way they would contingency plan. So you end up having a lot of people that don't know how to think the way the main entrepreneur thinks, and therefore they're falling short all the time. And so the entrepreneur is causing this self-sabotage by creating a team that relies overly on his or her ability to jump in and fix everything. So that's a major form of self-sabotage I see all the time as well.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com.
So how would you then work with your client to combat the self-sabotage?
The first thing that I do when I work with clients is we run a session called Superpower versus Kryptonite, because we want to identify what is your superpower that your team does not know. What is your kryptonite, the thing that constantly gets in your own way and prevents you from managing and leading your team the way that you absolutely need to? And once the entrepreneur sees what they're doing to self-sabotage, that's when they're like, well, oh my God, how do I fix it? And for me, it's really important that the entrepreneur self-identifies, wow, look at what I'm doing to myself. Look at what I'm doing to my team. Because you can't fix or unravel self-sabotage if the person doesn't see it and realize, wow, this is a major problem for me. So that's where we start. Everybody gets to start there.
And then what about those who work for a leader who is self-sabotaging and they can see it clearly? How would they convey to that person, hey, you're self-sabotaging and hurting the team?
The way that we do it, I actually, because I worked with so many companies from $1 million upwards of 1.2 billion, we had a template for giving leaders feedback that was a very precise process. Because again, right, when you give or receive feedback, typically people get defensive, they stop being as productive, they think that they're going to be fired. It's a whole situation that most people run into, but we wanted it to be, okay, we're going to give you feedback, you're going to receive feedback, it's going to be connecting, and it's going to be easy to share what you're experiencing with the other person in a more connected way so that the person just sees the behavior that needs to change and they don't take it as a personal attack. So that was, we really put in these templates and these systems in place to help people work through feedback to others so that self-sabotage isn't a bad word anymore. It's not something that has a lot of negative connotation.
What other blind spots might there be in our subconscious that is holding us back from creating more wealth?
Gosh, there have been so many over the years. But what I would tell you all is that there's typically three main buckets that a lot of these blind spots fall into. So there's usually a blind spot around separating yourself from other people. And you think that if I do the work on my own, I take it all on my own, that I'll get it done faster. There's a blind spot around separating ourselves from something greater. And we're like, there's nothing out there that's helping me. There's nothing out there that's going to make this easier for me. I just have to do it all on my own. And then there's that last piece, which is where you separate from yourself. And you're like, I just don't think that I have what it takes. I don't know if I can show up for myself. I don't know if I can make this happen. There's that I'm not good enough concept that comes up. And so I would say those are sort of the three main buckets of where self-sabotage and blind spots show up for us. And of course, there are things like imposter syndrome that comes up as well. But I think for most of the real estate entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they have a specific form of blind spot around how they lead and manage their teams. Because in their world, they can churn and burn through people. They can hire new people. And instead of, they look to hire new people or more people instead of really focusing on themselves as being the center point of all the dysregulation happening within their business.
How do you break through that then? I mean, how do you get them to kind of step outside themselves to see those things and correct them?
The first step, like I mentioned, was that first session. That's superpower versus kryptonite. That's sort of the entry point. And then once they see what their pattern is, how they're constantly doing the same thing over and over in their life, and they've usually been doing this for probably 20, 30 years. Once they see it, then they're very keen on getting that pattern interrupted. And so I teach them different techniques to interrupt the pattern, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. And then from there, we work on everything from getting rid of the energy of guilt, getting rid of the energy of fear, getting rid of these different feelings that are driving their actions to be not as effective. And then, from there, I've also been a business consultant for 15 years. So thankfully, I know how a lot of businesses run. And I can say, okay, this behavior that you're doing right now, which is causing all these problems, if we shift this behavior, then you can do these things differently in business. And then they start seeing the shift between their behavior, the change in business, and the revenue that they create. So once you start seeing that change, people just want more and more of the change.
Entrepreneurship, being a real estate investor, there's a lot of leadership that's involved in that. And what are some of the gaps that you see in leadership that need to be corrected as well?
It's funny, when I first started doing this work about 15 years ago, we weren't sure what the leadership gaps were, right? But over 15 years, it's very clear now that there are three main gaps. And I would say I would even add in a fourth gap that I've identified that I'd never really talked about before. So I'm going to bring up all four. So the first leadership gap is almost always delegation. People within companies and entrepreneurs in general have a very difficult time delegating because there hasn't been a process for delegation. When I worked with the Navy SEAL teams, I was so amazed by the way their brains worked and the processes and the systems that they had created that I looked to backwards engineer from the SEAL teams. What is a delegation process that normal people can do that just heighten our ability to hand off a project and have people meet the deadline every single time? So delegation is the first one. The second one is around giving and receiving, connecting feedback. Because as you know, if we ever think about feedback from our past, it's always like, oh gosh, feedback, criticism, it wasn't good. It never got us where we wanted to go. We were always defensive with it. And this feedback concept is, well, why can't we have a template to give and receive feedback in a way that's hyper connecting so that behavior actually changes between members of a team? That would change the productivity of the team members. That would change their connection level. It would change the communication level. So that's really what I look to bring into companies because it's such a big gap. The third one is contingency planning. So almost every team has only one person that's amazing at contingency planning, and everybody else is trying to figure out, do I tactically plan? Do I strategically plan? And nobody does planning the same way. And so bringing in a template to help people plan in the most effective way allows people to learn how to contingency plan effectively so that when a problem comes up, it's not just the lead person having to jump in to put out the fire. Everybody knows how to put out the fire. So those are the main three. But then the fourth one that I've realized recently, I call it a trauma gap because almost always there is some level of trauma. And when I say trauma, I mean a perceived loss of control. It's just a perception that I don't have control in this moment. A perceived loss of control that is guiding someone to make decisions in business that actually is not serving their adult persona, but is based on the 7-year-old that's running their subconscious brain. And so I found that more often than not, we all have some level of trauma in our lives. Most of it is unresolved. Most of it we're not aware of. And that is something that businesses in general tend to not discuss or even work on.
Can you give us an example of that? I mean, you mentioned that at the beginning of the conversation, like the trauma that creates a scarcity mindset that kind of originated from childhood, whether you had a single parent or, not enough money. Give us an example of how you've seen that play out with some of your clients and what the result has been.
One of my clients, he was very unique. He came to me because he had been stuck at a certain level in his business. And I'm not going to use the real numbers, but I'll just use some made up ones. He was stuck at about, say, $2 million a year that he was able to create. Every time he get close to going past 2 million, he would get deathly ill and end up in the hospital. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. He's like, I just can't fix this. I don't know what this cycle is. So when we found him and we talked through this with him, me and my team, we were able to identify that at age 15, when his dad passed away, his dad had only ever made $2 million. And he had created this sync up in his brain that if he were to make more than $2 million, he would die, just like his dad had died. And he was creating sickness in his body to follow that pattern. Now, the second we looked at that pattern, we showed the pattern to him, and we started unraveling the pattern with a bunch of different techniques, mentally, emotionally, physically, and on the neurochemical side. He went on to take his company public and, take it to IPO within a year. So massive transformation. And he was healthy the entire time, never had an issue with his health, which for me is actually so, he told me, he's like, Annie, I can't even believe I had a fear of death that was holding me back from everything in business. He had no idea. So that's one example. So obviously making a lot more money, more engaged with life, healthier too, really incredible result there. And I had another gentleman who was in as weird as this sounds, he would make a very similar $6 to $9 million mistake every couple of years because he would choose to take action in business based on his ego and not based on doing the due diligence he needed to do on a deal. So he was taking action to get into a deal based on trying to prove himself because he had an overly critical father. And he was constantly trying to prove to his dad that he was enough. So he'd jump into deals without doing any due diligence. Once we identified, and I actually identified it because he had this trauma tic where his face would like scrunch up and he would squint a lot whenever he was trying to prove himself in a conversation. Once we identified that, we unraveled that. He has now gone on to build multiple businesses, making a lot more money, doing things differently than he's ever done. And he has never once gotten caught in losing $6 to $9 million again. So pretty incredible change in people.
What would you say to our audience about their childhood, that 7-year-old, and how to go back and figure out what it is that happened at that age that is affecting their decisions that they're making right now?
Well, I would tell everybody listening, as much as you don't like hearing this from me, your 7-year-old, that little kid inside of you, is the child that is running your business decisions. Because the 7-year-old is the one who created a story that's been playing out over and over and over again based on something that happened to that 7-year-old that he or she couldn't control. And what's fascinating is if you can figure out what that story is that your 7-year-old has been telling you over and over again, and you unravel that story, you actually will create more success for yourself in relationships, in business. I find too, just with the way you feel success in your life, you will start to feel fulfillment in a completely different way because that 7-year-old holds the key to unlocking all the potential for who you are in business. And most of us never do that work. And so we never know, are we stepping into our calling? Are we stepping into legacy? Are we doing the thing that's right, that's really going to fill ourselves up? We don't know because we haven't connected with that 7-year-old.
How would people find out more about you, get a hold of you? Feel free to share whatever you would like.
You can always contact me through Instagram. That seems to be the easiest way. It's northstarleadership.annie, ANNIE. A lot of people reach out to me there. You can also send me an email directly if you just wanted to, dive onto a discovery call and figure out what am I doing to block myself? And that's just from sending me an email, Annie@northstarleadershipschool.com.
What is your favorite hack or app?
I would say ChatGPT is just fantastic. I mean, we all love using ChatGPT, but my favorite app, honestly, I just use Insight Timer a lot because I feel like that one is just really soothing in the evenings just to be able to play music, different beta waves or delta waves for the brain. And I use that quite a bit.
Insight Timer?
Insight Timer. It's a meditation app. And it basically has a wide variety of different brain sounds you can listen to calm the brain, as well as meditations. And Sarah Blondin is a great person to listen to if there are any women listening to this podcast, because she really helps calm the anxiety that can fill our minds sometimes.
Also, your hack about the spray that can calm your brain cells.
That's incredible. I mean, for all the entrepreneurs, like really, if you are not on this stuff, and it's all organic, so it doesn't change anything. It just turns on your body's natural ability to calm yourself. If you're not on this stuff, you're leaving so much money on the table with regards to your success in business because you cannot make the same decisions when your nervous system is amplified.
Fantastic. Well, Annie, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I mean, I love what you've shared today. And on this show, we usually stick with, the meat and potatoes of real estate investing and different types of real estate investing. And I shy away from the mindset and the type of stuff we've talked about today, but you've done such a great job of getting very specific and, what to look for, how to overcome it, and how we all might be making decisions that are either made from a scarcity mindset, a self-sabotaging mindset, and how to identify that 7-year-old who might actually be running our business right now.
I love that you did this. Thank you for involving me and bringing in some mindset work. If you ever need me to jump back on, I'd love to help.
Thanks so much for being on the show today.
So welcome.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's HIGinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.